This is the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing.
Hello and welcome to Season 1 of the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing, proudly presented by Ear Science Institute Australia, a not-for-profit medical research institute. In this podcast, we'll bring you into our world, the world of ear and hearing science. Together with Professor Marcus Atlas, we will discuss the latest in ear and hearing research and what it means to you.
I'm Dan Vandermeer. I'm a digital content specialist and podcast host and passionate about raising awareness for the impact of hearing loss.
And I'm Lisa Kutsia. I'm a qualified audiologist and the Chief Operating Officer at Ear Science Institute Australia.
This podcast provides information of a general nature and does not constitute medical advice.
Today we are talking to Professor Marcus Atlas. He's a surgeon scientist and the founding director of Ear Science Institute Australia. We are excited to chat with Professor Atlas for the very first episode of our podcast, and we will discuss the holy grail of finding a cure for hearing loss.
Professor Atlas, welcome to the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing.
G'day, Dan. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Now, Professor Atlas, I know that I took my hearing for granted, and as a 48-year-old man, it's starting to play effects on me. I played in bands for years, in loud rock venues, and drums, guitars, and my bad singing all contributed to what I think now, generally mainly in pubs, I have trouble with what we used to call in the music game the muddled mix. I struggle hearing distinct conversations sometimes in where the ambient noise is quite loud.
Dan, I didn't know this was going to be a consultation. Because honestly, you got a few problems there.
Thank you very much. I'll come see you later. What do you think our listeners need to know about their hearing in general?
Well, hearing's a really important sense, and it's what we've concentrated on here at Ear Science Institute Australia for over 20 years. And we think that the rate of hearing loss and the increase over the years is a real problem in our community. So we set about 20 years ago doing a whole lot of things to try and help people in Western Australia, nationally and around the world with hearing loss. And we set about doing it by connecting our clinics, our research and our education all together. And then it got to the community, and we started working on helping people within the community and starting our outreach programs, and Lisa will tell you about some of those. But really, it's a multi-dimensional beast, and it's grown enormously, and I'm really proud of the impact we've had within the community, particularly our clinics.
So it should be great.
So, Marcus, as an audiologist, for me, it is such a unique model, with the education, the research and the clinical service delivery working together. Can you tell us what the prevalence of hearing loss is and really the impact of hearing loss on people's quality of life?
Well, 1 in 6 people experience hearing loss and 1 in 4 over 65, but by 2030 the number will be even greater. And what we're starting to see is the two ends. We're starting to see this increasing number of people who are older, who are living longer, getting more hearing loss and requiring more care. So, of course, they require all of our normal interventions, including the use of hearing aids, but many of them are getting to implantable devices like cochlear implants now because they're living so much longer. And then there's Dan's mates, the ones who are younger, who are exposing themselves to too much noise. And so the way they can experience sound now is different to what I remember when I was a kid. And so they can get a huge amount of volume into their ears easily. And our job is to try and protect them from that. So trying to tell the story about being careful, not stopping music. We love music. We all love it. And it's fun when it's loud, but we need to be careful about how much noise exposure and how we tell that age group about how to be reasonable about noise exposure. So there's these two ends.
That's that sort of that education side and then service delivery. We want to get to people early and educate them on the importance of looking after their hearing.
Yeah, we do, and that's one of our jobs, Lisa. Yeah. And, you and I are out there every day helping patients with hearing loss. But one of our other jobs is to tell this story. That's what this podcast is doing, telling this important story of trying to stop people from coming to see us so that we never have to see them because they don't have hearing loss like the previous generation. So we're seeing kids who are really young with tinnitus and hearing loss because of noise.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
And it's the hearing loss, Marcus, but it's also the impact that hearing loss has on people. So we know now hearing loss is linked to social isolation, to loneliness, and even cognitive decline. And we hope to hear about these things more in later podcasts with our researchers.
Lisa, thanks for reminding me. As always, you remind me most days of things that I've forgotten, and it's the story of hearing loss, isn't it? It's what goes on in the background of quality of life and loneliness. But this interesting work that Donna, I guess, is going to talk to you about, Donna Giacotti, and the work she's done with the connection of hearing loss and dementia. Yeah. So dementia's really touched my family's life, and so I'm really aware of what it can do to families like ours and my parents. And hearing loss is one of the things that we can do something about. There's not so much we can do about dementia at the moment, but there are certain things that we can do and try to prevent that we know will have a significant impact on the development of cognitive decline. And one of them, the biggest one, believe it or not, the biggest one is hearing loss in middle age. And that's what we're out to do something about. But Donna's going to do the necessary work that scientists have to do, and we have to prove it. We have to prove that if we intervene with hearing aids, particularly that's her study, that we will slow or maybe even prevent the onset of dementia, and how wonderful that would be. So she's doing that work. She's doing that wonderful work.
Fantastic.
Okay. Marcus, we know you have been at the forefront of ear and hearing surgery for over 20 years. Have you seen the way hearing loss is treated evolve over this time?
Yeah, I've seen things change enormously during my surgical career. What I think I've noticed the most is in surgery is the progression of implantable hearing devices. That's just taken my practice over. So when I first started out, it was much more about tumours of the ear, chronic ear disease, some of the hearing reconstruction for a disorder called otosclerosis with stapedectomy. And cochlear implants were in their infancy, and Graham Clark in Melbourne was just beginning to really implement this groundbreaking work that he and others had done in the area of cochlear implantation. So during my career, it has just blossomed. Mm-hmm. So there's been newer devices, changes in cochlear implants. More and more people are now suitable for cochlear implants that were never before. It began in adults, and then it started, and then kids have been a big group of cochlear implants. And now, of course, as I just told you before, there are all of these older patients. So we're seeing the majority of our growth in our implant clinic is in patients over 60. Yeah. And, our oldest patients, I think over 100 now. And, we've implanted patients in their 90s. Who would have ever thought we would do something like that? So these incredibly independent, particularly women who are living over the age of 90, where hearing loss is their primary disability, and they get an implant. So and it works. It works. So this 90-year-old brain cops this implant, and it works. So it's remarkable.
And that's such an important point, because there's still so many people that think cochlear implants are for children only. Yeah. So that age is no barrier when it comes to hearing implants.
Yeah,
so that is such an excellent point.
That's true. And so we're seeing it all here at Ear Science. It really means a lot to us, this implantable hearing program. They're hard to run, aren't they, Lisa? It's really hard to run an implantable hearing aid program. It's not incredibly well remunerated for the clinicians and administrators that we spend so much time on it. But it's so important to us at Ear Science Institute because it has such a big impact. And so we've worked really hard to become a really large implant group within Australia. We're really proud of the work we've done. So we'll see more of that as time goes on, I think.
And we know it's still 90% of people that need a cochlear implant don't have one.
No, that's right.
So
it's pretty unbelievable
that's amazing.
That there are all these people out there who have got severe to profound hearing loss or types of hearing loss that would be more suited to an implantable device, mainly a cochlear implant, than a conventional hearing aid or what they're doing, and some of them have no hearing aid at all. And so it's a massive group of people in our community that could be helped, I think.
So, of course, if they're engaging in this podcast through YouTube and captions and they're reading this, they could certainly get in contact and do something about their hearing loss.
They could, Dan, and it's really important because for some of our patients, captions are really incredibly important. They need visual cues, of course, to be able to communicate. And this podcast that we're all listening to can be really hard for some of the patients with severe to profound hearing loss. And so we can do things to help them. So if they're using captions now, they should speak to us. We can help.
Yes.
And I like what you say, Dan, to get in contact with us. You know, people sort of feel that they need to go and see their GP or their audiologist to come and talk to us about a cochlear implant. But really, just contact us and we can take you through that journey.
Yeah, fantastic.
So you can be the sort of the leader in your hearing journey.
Yes.
And it's something that we call patient-centered care or client-centered care. You know, you are at the centre of the care that you receive.
And you've got to take responsibility for your own, actions, don't you, as an adult? So, if you are experiencing those issues, then yes, certainly it's time to reach out. So, Marcus, putting it quite bluntly, are we ever going to cure hearing loss?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. It's something that I think about every day.
Yeah.
And I have for a long period of time, since I sort of became involved in the science. So I became a surgeon scientist. So I was trained to be a surgeon, but training to be a medical practitioner means you have to be really aware of science. But we tend to get involved in our clinical work. And I guess around 30 years ago, I wanted to connect again to science and become a surgeon scientist, to connect science and my clinical work to see whether it was possible to do new things that would help millions of people instead of one person at a time.
Yeah.
And so some of the fantastic work that we've done over the years here about trying to cure hearing loss has really come to an important stage. And that's been because we've got a wonderful board and executive who look around the world for the very best people that we can find to seduce to come to Perth, or maybe we can work with them whilst they are still wherever they are in the world, and create virtual science, or bring them here to Perth, as I said. And one of them is Elaine Wong, who came from Hong Kong, and her interest is in creating these things called organoids. And organoids is using a stem cell approach, training the stem cell with very special cues and medications and proteins to train this stem cell to become an ear. An inner ear. Yeah. So she turns this stem cell, and over a period of time, over months, to become a human three-dimensional inner ear, the organ of hearing, the cochlea. And so inside that has got these tiny little hair cells, which are the endpoints of nerves, and they're the ones that pick up the sound and connect up to the brain via nerves. And this organoid is the organ of hearing, the cochlea. So it looks actually a little bit like the human inner ear cochlea, which is like a snail. It looks like a snail shape. That's what the cochlea is. And inside are these special hair cells. And she's been able to grow these organoids that actually have these hair cells that start to form into a sort of snail shape and connect up to these nerve fibers, starting from a single skin cell that becomes a stem cell. And it is programmed with the genes that the cell that it came from. So your skin cell will become your cochlea.
Wow.
And so she grows your cochlea. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
She grows your cochlea, and then she can do some experiments with it. So she can look at special pathways or particular medications and try to see what goes wrong with certain types of genetic hearing losses, particularly Usher syndrome, which is a real big interest of ours here. But other causes of hearing loss, so that she can devise experiments and medications and treatments and genetics that might be able to modify the processes that cause hearing loss. So this is really something that will make a difference. So this is the organoid story, and the way we're using organoids. It's not so much the organoid itself. We're not particularly thinking of everybody asks, could you transplant my organoid back into my ear to make a new cochlea because mine's stuffed up from some other cause. Yeah. Well, that won't be easy. So we're looking at other ways. Can we use the organoid to devise ways that we can deliver drugs, proteins, genes to the inner ear to cure the hearing loss? And so that has been an incredible change in the way we do things, because we now have got a human model rather than an animal model for hearing loss and the way we might be able to modify it. So now we're starting to use these organoids on this disorder called ototoxicity. And ototoxicity is drugs particularly, and in this case, drugs that treat cancer that are toxic to the inner ear. So what they do is they paralyze or damage the inner ear hair cells, because that's a side effect of the drug. But the drug is primarily aimed at trying to kill the cancer cells, but they also kill the inner ear. So patients get hearing loss, and some of them get severe hearing loss, and some of them get more minor hearing loss. And these are particularly drugs that are used in childhood cancers. So these are kids who develop hearing loss from these medications, this ototoxicity, and of course they keep that hearing loss for the rest of their life.
Yep.
So what can we do to prevent this ototoxicity? And Hani Al-Salami is a pharmacist by training who's a scientist who works in our lab, another fantastic recruit into Ear Science Institute Australia here in Perth, where he will look at, and he is looking at, particular drugs that will antagonise this ototoxic effect, and he's using the organoids to experiment on that. So this is some of the first forays into the prevention of hearing loss by the use of these organoids.
Fantastic.
And they will have such a massive impact on these children's lives.
Yeah, I mean, some of them would require hearing aids, some of them would require potentially cochlear implants from their ototoxicity. So imagine being able to prevent it. It would be such a wonderful thing for these kids.
Yep.
So, Marcus, I mean, it's amazing the amount of research that's happening currently in our labs. How is this research funded, and where is it done?
Yeah, research is a tough thing to fund, let me tell you. And the funding comes from various sources, both for infrastructure and buildings as well as people. And it comes from government agencies like the National Health and Medical Research Council, the Australian Research Council, so they're government, national government funding groups. There's state funding groups. They're not as large as the national groups. There's philanthropy. There's non-government organisations. So you can imagine our scientists are spending their entire time searching out grants, which are really hard to get. It's hard being a scientist in Australia and being able to find funding. But for our infrastructure, we are very, very lucky that there are philanthropists here in Perth who have been incredibly generous to us at Ear Science Institute Australia. Our building here in Subiaco has been funded primarily by philanthropy, and our research building, where we've now got a floor of 600 square metres of basic science area that's dedicated completely to ear and hearing science, and that's a big amount of science space in the world.
Yeah.
And that's funded by philanthropy. That's the Ralph and Patricia Sarich family philanthropy, for which we're incredibly grateful, and we occupy part of that building. So you can see it sort of comes from various sources.
Yeah, fantastic. So, Marcus, we've spoken about what we would call, nerve hearing loss or hearing loss in the hearing organ. But I know middle ear infections is another big problem for our children. I was privileged enough to visit the Pilbara and the Aboriginal communities there, and it was just so evident. There are so many Aboriginal kids currently that are not getting the education that they need because their ears are infected. What are we currently doing in that space to help middle ear infections and even the long-lasting effects of middle ear infections when we talk about perforations?
Yeah, well, Indigenous ear disease is a terrible blight on our society. My whole career, Indigenous ear disease has been really the worst part of middle ear disease in Australia. It's just unbelievable that in our world, our incredibly well-off nation, has Indigenous kids who have this blight of middle ear disease. And despite all of the efforts of a lot of people over the years, it's still a continuing and terrible problem. But there is much interesting work that science can do to try and help. And so We're actually a world-leading group, probably the world-leading group in the understanding of the eardrum. So the human eardrum's made out of 3 layers, a middle layer that's part of the middle ear lining, a middle fibrous layer, and the outer layer, which is made of a special type of skin. And so we've been working on understanding the skin layer so that we could develop this thing called Eardrum. And Eardrum is a work that we've been doing for 20 years, which is a scaffold made primarily out of silk. So believe it or not, we're actually using silk, like the textile silk, which has got a biological application. And so we use it in the body. And it's been used, you've heard of silk sutures that sew up the skin. And it's the same type of silk, but actually made into other membranes. So it starts from the silkworm and ends up as this transparent membrane that we use for Eardrum, which is the reconstruction of the eardrum. And from this work that we've done on the eardrum, we've been able to develop this group of scientists who have this incredible understanding of middle ear disease and particularly how we're going to treat it. So Eardrum is about repairing the eardrum, which is a big problem in Indigenous kids, but it's also a problem in non-Indigenous Australians, and how we are going to utilise Eardrum for repair of the eardrum, but also how we're going to modify the middle ear disease, the infections that they get of the middle ear and mastoid bone. And that's our next layer of work about how we're going to understand that, how we're going to use drug therapy, how we're going to use new approaches to this middle ear disease. So we hope that we'll be able to apply that to Indigenous Australians, particularly kids, to be able to prevent the onset of middle ear disease and the associated hearing loss and educational and other quality of life problems that happen in this community that we would really like to improve.
Yeah.
And so, this has an enormous impact on the way they live in civic life, the way the job seeking, education.
Of course, yes.
It's just this massive impact. And so if we can get to the bottom of it, it's probably not just the eardrum. There's a lot of other factors that lead to middle ear disease, and there's work that's being done around our country to try and understand better why Indigenous kids get more middle ear disease than non-Indigenous Australians, but they do terribly. And so to understand the why and to be able to treat it more effectively would make them have, as you say, a massive impact on education and opportunity.
Yep.
And at Ear Science, I feel we're really approaching it really well. We're both delivering services in the Pilbara to the community, but we're also tackling from a science perspective to see how we can, treat these children, how we can treat the ear disease differently and not just continuing to test hearing day in and day out.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lisa.
Because we need to change how things are being done.
I think there's a lot of things that have been done over the years, and I've been part of that have been repetitive and unsuccessful. Yeah. And just doing the same thing again and expecting a different outcome is not smart.
And really how we tackle everything that we do. Bringing the research and clinical care together. We do that at Lions Hearing Clinic. Everything is informed by science. It's evidence-based. And the problems we see in clinic, we also feed back into research to make sure that what the researchers are doing are actually informed by what clients and patients are currently struggling with.
Yep.
So that's very exciting. So Marcus, as an audiologist working in Lions, we always get asked, is there a cure for hearing loss and should I wait? So you touched on sort of the work we're doing at Ear Science, but can you tell me, what do we say to our clients? Is there a cure and should I wait?
Well, say that there will become a cure, but don't wait. And so the kind of things that we're doing now in terms of hearing aid technology and implantable hearing devices is just unbelievable. And so to deprive yourself of access to those wonderful things at the Lions Hearing Clinics would be crazy. We can do things that doesn't mean you will miss out on a potential cure for hearing loss in the future. So even if we put a cochlear implant in place, it doesn't mean that some of the things that I've described to you today won't be available to you. So that's the first thing. Yeah. You can have a hearing aid and improve your quality of life within days of seeing an audiologist at a Lions Hearing Clinic, and it will transform the way you deal with your family and the way you deal with your friends and what you do at work. You will be transformed by the fitting of a hearing aid with hearing loss. So don't wait. I think the Lions Hearing Clinics, Lisa, might see 35,000 people in a year. That's just unbelievable what you've created. And so if all of those people were to miss out on this wonderful opportunity to hear again, it would be a terrible shame. So they should not wait for a cure, but there will be one, and they should be involved in it. They should be interested in it. They should become trial participants if they ever get the opportunity, and to stay part of it, but make sure that they stay part of the hearing world to be able to communicate with their friends and family, I think.
Yep.
So, Marcus, this is a podcast for the community, for people in Perth and around the world. How can they get involved in finding a cure for hearing loss?
Well, they can join Justin Langer, who, of course, is the Australian cricket coach, and he's also the Healthy Hearing Ambassador for Ear Science Institute Australia. They can become just like him and become an ambassador for us here and tell the story of hearing loss and become part of understanding and telling the story about hearing health in our community. They could become involved. They could become involved in a clinical trial that will happen. Donna's recruiting for HearCog at the moment. There'll be future clinical trials at Ear Science Institute Australia they might want to become involved in. They could become involved in philanthropy. So there are hundreds of West Australians that are involved in donating to our gift of hearing, which is aimed in trying to do exactly what we talked about today, to try and improve the lives of people with hearing loss. So there's lots of ways our community can get involved here at Ear Science.
Mm. And everybody that sees us at Ear Science, at Lions Hearing Clinic, is really part of finding a cure for hearing loss.
Professor Marcus Atlas, this has been so interesting and inspiring. Thank you. The future is looking very bright. What are the three key things that you want our listening audience, the people listening to this and reading this podcast, to take away from what we've talked about today?
Well, thanks, Dan, for being here again. It's wonderful to have you at Ear Science and be becoming part of everything we do. So there are three take-home messages, I think. A cure for hearing won't happen overnight, so don't ignore hearing loss. Come to Lions Hearing Clinics, get your hearing checked, and this will be a really important part of your life in the future. The second thing is the work in our lab is incredibly promising, and we know that we're one step closer to this cure for hearing loss. And the third takeaway message is that you can help us. And you can help us by becoming involved in the ways that I've talked about at Ear Science, and particularly donating to our Gift of Hearing campaign and helping all of the people that have hearing loss and all of the ways we're trying to improve their life.
Professor Marcus Atlas, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Dan. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you imagine personally being part of finding a cure for hearing loss? Over 20 years ago, Professor Marcus Atlas began the journey of Ear Science Institute Australia, making hearing a focal point for our local community. Professor Atlas had a dream. He wanted to bring world-class research, surgery and audiology to people of Western Australia. Fast forward to today, and the importance of hearing loss is being recognised on a global stage. In 2019, the Institute was appointed as one of only 6 designated World Health Organization collaborating centres for ear and hearing care. We have brought together a team of over 150 surgeons, researchers, medical specialists, scientists, audiologists and support staff. We are proudly at the forefront of internationally recognised research, providing world-leading education and shining a light on the importance of untreated hearing loss in our community, all from Perth in Western Australia. You can join us in finding a cure. Head to www.earscience.org.au, click on Donate to find out how your support can make a difference to so many lives.
If you've enjoyed this episode, let us know by rating and reviewing this podcast or sharing it with a friend or family member. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Next time, we will be talking to Dr. Beck Bennett, an audiologist and researcher who will share her insight into the social and emotional impacts of hearing loss.
Hearing is about communication, or the importance of hearing loss is because how it affects communication. And so I would say good communication is everyone's responsibility.
To view this episode with captions, visit the Ear Science YouTube channel or our website www.earscience.org.au/podcast. To suggest a topic for a future episode, links to more information and all the research papers on this topic, visit our website www.earscience.org.au/podcast. The producer of the Ear Science podcast, The Science of Healthy Hearing, is Emma Ireland, with sound engineering and editing by myself, Daniel Vandermeer. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are recording this podcast on, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and the land on which you're listening from. We pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging.